Imagine stepping into a world without running water, without scented soaps, where a warm bath could be seen as a spiritual risk rather than a simple pleasure. Would you have the courage to live that way? The Middle Ages are wrapped in legends about filth and fear, but the truth is more human than the myths. People were not just dirty or clean. They were practical, curious, cautious, sometimes inventive, sometimes mistaken. They faced cold winters, shared crowded homes, and listened closely to the advice of priests and physicians who believed the body and soul were deeply connected. And in that daily struggle to stay healthy and honorable, they created routines that feel strange to us today, yet made perfect sense to them. Picture a small town at sunrise. A baker dusts flour from his hands, while a young apprentice rinses his face in a wooden basin. The water is drawn from a well and warmed near the oven. He rubs his cheeks with a rough cloth, because a good scrub was thought to wake the skin and strengthen the spirit. A few streets over, a noblewoman opens a little pouch filled with dried lavender and rosemary. She lifts it to her collar, breathes in, and pins it to her gown. It is not vanity in her mind. It is one more way to keep the air near her body pure and sweet. Now imagine a bustling bathhouse on a market day. You hear chatter, laughter, a splash, the hum of a place where people come not just to wash but to meet, share news, and rest. Steam curls up from wooden tubs. A cloth divider separates men and women in theory, but rules are only as strong as the community's mood. For a few hours, life feels lighter. The body is warm, the mind is calm, and problems soften in the steam. These houses of water were the social heart of many medieval towns, especially before fear reshaped the rhythm of daily life. Then the world changed. Waves of sickness made people question what kept them safe. Some healers warned that hot water opened the skin to dangerous air. Some preachers said that caring too much for the body tempted pride. With time, many bathhouses closed. Yet people did not simply give up on cleanliness. They adapted. They washed their hands and faces at home. They kept linen shirts as clean as possible, since fresh fabric against the skin was believed to draw out sweat and dirt. They turned to herbs, to wine rinses, to ash powders that worked like a kind of dry shampoo. They learned to clean without always stepping into a tub. There were extremes, of course. You may hear stories of kings who bathed only a handful of times in their lives, or queens who boasted about monthly baths as if they were luxuries to be admired. At the same time, a monk might write a rule that allowed washing 3 times a year for discipline, while a French city kept dozens upon dozens of public baths for ordinary people. The Middle Ages held opposites side by side. That tension is what makes them so fascinating. Listen closely, and you can hear voices from other lands shaping European habits. Travelers and crusaders returned from the Middle East speaking with wonder about bright tiled bathhouses filled with fragrance and quiet conversation. Some brought home the love of hot water and massage. Others kept their distance, guided by warnings from church leaders who felt uneasy with the intimacy of public bathing. In this push and pull, a new etiquette of cleanliness was born, and always there were the little details that make the past feel alive. A barber who pulled teeth and trimmed beards on the same stool, a maid who scrubbed a stone floor with sand until it shone, a child who learned to hold a sprig of mint beneath the nose in crowded streets, a physician who believed that clean air, simple diets, and steady sleep mattered more than any single bath. This is the world we are stepping into today, not a caricature of grime, but a real breathing society, finding its balance between body, soul, and survival. If you love history and want to keep uncovering the quiet truths behind great empires and everyday lives, like this video, subscribe to the Medieval Archives, and stay with us. There are so many stories still waiting in the steam. Picture this. You're walking through the cobblestone streets of 13th century London, and you hear laughter, splashing water, and animated conversations echoing from a large wooden building ahead. The sweet scent of lavender and rosemary drifts through the air, mixed with the steam rising from within. You've just discovered one of medieval Europe's most fascinating and misunderstood institutions, the public bathhouse. These weren't the grimy, neglected places you might imagine. Medieval bathhouses were actually sophisticated social centers that would make modern spa-goers feel right at home. In cities like Paris, London, and Bruges, these establishments were as common as taverns, and just as popular. By the year 1300, Paris alone boasted over 200 public baths, each one bustling with activity from dawn until dusk. The experience of visiting a medieval bathhouse was surprisingly luxurious. Upon entering, guests would be greeted by attendants who helped them undress and provided them with linen towels. The main bathing area featured large wooden tubs filled with heated water, often scented with herbs like mint, thyme, or chamomile. Some of the fancier establishments even had separate pools for different temperatures, much like modern thermal baths. What made these places truly special wasn't just the bathing itself, but the incredible social mixing that happened within their steamy walls. Merchants would conduct business deals while soaking in warm water. Nobles would gossip about court intrigue with their fellow bathers. Young people would meet potential romantic partners, and friendships were forged over shared conversations in the communal pools. The bathhouses operated with surprisingly progressive rules for their time. Most establishments had designated hours for men and women, typically with mornings reserved for women and afternoons for men. Some larger bathhouses even had completely separate sections, allowing both groups to enjoy the facilities simultaneously. However, these rules weren't always strictly enforced, especially during festivals or special occasions, when mixed bathing became more common. The staff at these medieval spas were skilled professionals who took their work seriously. Bath attendants, known as stove keepers, were responsible for maintaining the perfect water temperature and ensuring cleanliness. They would scrub customers' backs with coarse brushes made from animal hair, apply fragrant oils, and even provide basic medical treatments like bloodletting or tooth extraction. Some bathhouses employed musicians who would play lutes or harps to create a relaxing atmosphere. What's truly remarkable is how these establishments served as great equalizers in a rigidly hierarchical society. While nobles might arrive in finer clothes and tip more generously, once everyone was in the water, social distinctions became less pronounced. A wealthy merchant's daughter might find herself chatting with a skilled craftsman's wife, sharing stories and building connections that would have been impossible in other social settings. The bathhouses also played a crucial role in medieval romance and courtship. Young people would carefully time their visits to coincide with potential partners, and many love affairs began over shared conversations in the warm, intimate atmosphere of the baths. Some establishments even provided private chambers for couples, complete with beds and refreshments, making them popular destinations for both legitimate courtship and more clandestine encounters. These medieval social hubs were far more sophisticated than most people realize today. They represented a time when communal bathing and personal hygiene were not only accepted, but celebrated as essential parts of urban life. The next time someone tells you that medieval people were dirty and uncivilized, you can share this fascinating glimpse into a world where taking a bath was as much about community, business, and pleasure as it was about getting clean. But this golden age of communal bathing wasn't destined to last forever. Like so many beautiful chapters in history, it came to an abrupt and tragic end, and the story of how it happened reveals one of the most fascinating cultural shifts in medieval Europe. The year 1347 marked a turning point that would echo through centuries. The Black Death arrived in European ports like an unwelcome storm, spreading faster than anyone could comprehend. Within just 4 years, this devastating plague had claimed the lives of nearly 1/3 of Europe's entire population. Cities that once bustled with life became ghost towns overnight, and people desperately searched for explanations and solutions to this incomprehensible catastrophe. In their fear and confusion, medieval people began to look at their beloved bathhouses with suspicion. Medical theories of the time, influenced by ancient Greek ideas about the body's humors, suggested that hot water and steam could open the pores and make people more vulnerable to disease. What had once been seen as cleansing and healing suddenly became viewed as dangerous and potentially deadly. The church, which had always held a complex relationship with public bathing, seized this moment of crisis to promote a radically different view of cleanliness. Religious leaders began preaching that excessive attention to bodily cleanliness was not just medically risky, but spiritually dangerous as well. They argued that focusing too much on washing and grooming the physical body was a form of vanity that distracted people from caring for their immortal souls. This wasn't entirely new thinking. Even before the plague, Some Christian scholars had taught that physical comfort and pleasure, including the enjoyment of warm baths, could lead people away from spiritual devotion. They pointed to the early Christian hermits and saints who deliberately embraced physical discomfort as a path to spiritual purity. Saint Agnes, they reminded their congregations, had refused to bathe for years as a sign of her devotion to God. The transformation was remarkably swift and complete. Bathhouses that had operated for centuries suddenly found themselves empty. City councils, influenced by religious pressure and genuine health concerns, began passing laws restricting or outright banning public baths. By the late 14th century, most of the grand bathhouses of medieval Europe had either closed their doors permanently or been converted into other businesses. This cultural shift created some truly extraordinary individual stories. Take King Louis XIV of France, known as the Sun King, who ruled for an astonishing 72 years and lived to the remarkable age of 76. Despite his immense wealth and access to every luxury imaginable, this powerful monarch took only 2 complete baths in his entire lifetime. Yes, you heard that correctly. Just 2 full baths in nearly 8 decades of living. Louis wasn't unusual among the European nobility of his era. Instead of bathing, aristocrats developed elaborate rituals of dry cleaning. They would change their linen undergarments daily, believing that clean fabric against the skin was more effective and safer than washing with water. They rubbed their bodies with perfumed cloths, used dry powders to absorb oils, and applied generous amounts of fragrance to mask any unpleasant odors. The irony is almost heartbreaking when you consider it. These same nobles lived in palaces with sophisticated plumbing systems inherited from Roman engineering, yet they chose not to use them. The Palace of Versailles, Louis's magnificent home, had elaborate fountains and water features throughout its gardens. But the king himself avoided prolonged contact with water on his own body. What makes this story even more poignant is that other parts of the world continued to embrace bathing throughout this same period. In the Ottoman Empire, magnificent hammams served as centers of social life and personal care. In Japan, communal bathing remained an integral part of daily routine. Islamic cultures maintained sophisticated traditions of cleanliness that included regular washing as a religious obligation. Meanwhile, back in Europe, the rejection of bathing became so complete that by the 16th century, many people genuinely believed that water could carry diseases through the skin. Medical texts of the time seriously warned against the dangers of bathing, claiming it could weaken the body's natural defenses and invite illness. This dramatic transformation from a bath-loving culture to a water-fearing one shows us how quickly and completely societies can change their most basic practices when fear and faith combine. The medieval Europeans didn't abandon bathing out of ignorance or laziness, but because they genuinely believed they were protecting both their physical health and their spiritual salvation. It's a reminder that what seems obviously right or wrong to us today might be viewed very differently by future generations, looking back at our own curious customs and beliefs. So what happened when medieval Europeans abandoned their bathhouses but still needed to maintain some level of cleanliness and pleasant appearance? The answer reveals one of the most creative and resourceful periods in the history of personal hygiene. Without modern soaps and shampoos, medieval people developed an entire arsenal of alternative cleaning methods that were surprisingly sophisticated and often quite effective. Let's start with one of the most elegant solutions: wine washing. This wasn't just a luxury for the wealthy, though they certainly indulged in it more frequently. Medieval people discovered that wine, particularly white wine, had natural astringent properties that could clean and refresh the skin. Ladies of the court would pour fine wine into silver basins and use it to wash their faces and hands, believing it would keep their complexion clear and youthful. The alcohol content helped kill bacteria, while the natural acids gently exfoliated the skin. But wine was expensive, so common folk developed their own ingenious alternatives. They created a paste from crushed herbs mixed with animal fat or olive oil, which served as a primitive but effective soap substitute. Lavender, rosemary, thyme, and mint were particularly popular because they not only cleaned, but left behind a pleasant fragrance. Some recipes included ground oats or barley, which provided gentle scrubbing action while moisturizing the skin. The daily cleaning ritual for most medieval people involved what they called dry washing. They would strip down and vigorously rub their entire body with coarse linen cloths, sometimes dampened with herbal water or diluted wine. This process removed dead skin cells, absorbed oils, and stimulated circulation. It was surprisingly effective, and many people reported feeling genuinely refreshed afterward. Hair care presented its own unique challenges. Without shampoo, medieval women developed a technique that would probably surprise modern hairstylists. They would brush their hair with fine combs made from ivory or bone, then dust it with powdered herbs, or even finely ground breadcrumbs. The breadcrumbs absorbed excess oil from the hair, while the herbs provided fragrance and were believed to prevent lice and other pests. Perhaps the most charming aspect of medieval hygiene was the use of pomanders and scent bags. These were small, decorative pouches filled with aromatic herbs, spices, and sometimes precious oils. Nobles would attach them to their belts or tuck them into their clothing, creating a personal cloud of fragrance wherever they went. The most expensive pomanders contained exotic spices like cinnamon, cloves, and cardamom, imported from distant lands. Some were made from hollowed oranges studded with cloves, creating a natural air freshener that could last for months. The wealthy took this concept even further with what they called scent gloves. These were leather gloves perfumed with precious oils and worn not for warmth, but purely to spread fragrance when the wearer gestured or touched objects. Queen Elizabeth I of England was famous for her collection of scented gloves, which she would change several times throughout the day to match her mood or the occasion. Medieval people also understood the power of fresh linens in maintaining cleanliness. Since they avoided frequent bathing, they compensated by changing their undergarments as often as possible. The wealthy might change their linen shirts twice daily, while even peasants tried to wash and change their underclothes at least once a week. Clean linen against the skin was considered just as important as washing the skin itself. Teeth cleaning was another area where medieval ingenuity shone through. Without toothpaste, people chewed on aromatic twigs from birch or oak trees, which naturally cleaned the teeth while freshening the breath. Some recipes called for rubbing the teeth with a mixture of crushed mint and salt, or even ground charcoal mixed with herbs. Wealthy individuals owned ornate toothpicks made from silver or gold, which they used to remove food particles after meals. The medieval approach to dealing with strong body odors was remarkably sophisticated. They understood that certain foods could affect how a person smelled, so they avoided garlic and onions before important social events. Instead, they would eat parsley, mint, or fennel seeds to improve their breath. Some even carried small silver boxes filled with candied ginger or anise seeds to chew throughout the day. What's truly remarkable about these medieval hygiene practices is how they reflected both practical necessity and genuine aesthetic sensibility. These weren't people who had given up on cleanliness or attractiveness. Instead, they had developed an entirely different approach to personal care, one that emphasized fragrance, fresh clothing, and creative cleaning methods over frequent bathing. The irony is that many of these medieval alternatives were actually quite effective. Modern aromatherapy draws heavily on the same herbs and essential oils that medieval people used daily. The practice of dry brushing, which involves rubbing the skin with coarse cloths or brushes, is now recommended by many health experts for improving circulation and skin texture. These ingenious medieval solutions remind us that human creativity and vanity are timeless. Even when faced with religious restrictions and medical fears about bathing, people found ways to feel clean, smell pleasant, and present their best selves to the world. Their methods might seem strange to us today, but they represent a fascinating chapter in humanity's ongoing quest to stay fresh, attractive, and socially acceptable. Did you know that King Louis XIV almost never bathed? If you enjoyed this video, like, share, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives channel for more amazing stories. Tell us in the comments, could you go a month without a bath? When it comes to royal bathing habits, medieval monarchs created some of the most fascinating contradictions in history. These were people who could afford anything they desired, who lived in magnificent palaces with armies of servants at their beck and call, yet their relationships with water and cleanliness were often more complicated and surprising than those of their subjects. Let's start with one of the most intriguing royal figures, Queen Elizabeth I of England. This remarkable woman, who ruled for 45 years and transformed England into a major European power, had a very specific and somewhat unusual approach to bathing. Elizabeth proudly declared that she took a full bath once every month, whether she needed it or not. To us, this might seem infrequent, but in the context of her time, monthly bathing was actually considered quite progressive, even excessive by some standards. Elizabeth's monthly bath was an elaborate ritual that took hours to complete. Her servants would heat enormous quantities of water in the palace kitchens, then carry it bucket by bucket to her private chambers. The water was scented with rose petals, lavender, or other expensive herbs imported from across Europe. She would soak in a wooden tub lined with linen sheets, while her ladies-in-waiting attended to every detail of her comfort. The entire process was seen as both a luxury and a necessary royal duty to maintain her appearance for public occasions. What made Elizabeth's bathing habits even more interesting was her incredible attention to other aspects of cleanliness. While she limited her full baths, she washed her hands and face multiple times daily with scented waters. Her teeth received constant attention with cloths soaked in wine and honey mixtures. She changed her elaborate undergarments twice daily and owned hundreds of pairs of perfumed gloves. In her own way, she was probably cleaner than most people of her era, just not in the way we might expect. Now let's travel back several centuries to meet a monarch who had a completely different relationship with water. Charlemagne, the great Frankish king who ruled much of Western Europe in the late 8th and early 9th centuries. Unlike the bath-avoiding royals who came after him, Charlemagne was absolutely passionate about swimming and bathing. This towering figure, who stood over 6 feet tall in an age when most people were much shorter, loved nothing more than plunging into natural hot springs. Charlemagne discovered the thermal springs at Aachen, in what is now Germany, and became so enchanted with them that he built his entire palace complex around these natural baths. The springs maintained a constant warm temperature year-round, and the king would swim in them almost daily, often inviting his courtiers, visiting dignitaries, and even his sons to join him. These weren't quick, functional baths, but leisurely social gatherings that could last for hours. The emperor took his love of bathing so seriously that he constructed elaborate bathing facilities throughout his realm. His palace at Aachen featured multiple pools of different temperatures, changing rooms lined with expensive fabrics, and even areas for massage and relaxation. He understood that bathing could be both pleasurable and politically useful, often conducting important negotiations while soaking in the warm waters with fellow rulers or influential nobles. What's remarkable about Charlemagne's bathing habits is how they reflected his broader approach to leadership. He was a king who believed in experiencing life fully, whether that meant leading armies into battle, studying with the greatest scholars of his time, or enjoying the simple pleasure of warm water against his skin. His courtiers noted that he seemed most relaxed and thoughtful during his long bathing sessions, often emerging with solutions to complex political problems. The contrast between these two monarchs reveals how dramatically royal attitudes toward bathing changed over the centuries. Charlemagne lived in a time when Roman traditions still influenced European culture, and public bathing was seen as civilized and beneficial. Elizabeth, ruling nearly 800 years later, lived in an era when medical theories and religious teachings had created deep suspicions about the safety and morality of frequent bathing. But royal bathing habits weren't consistent even within the same time periods. King Henry IV of France, Elizabeth's contemporary, was famous for his love of perfumes and scented waters, yet he reportedly avoided full baths for months at a time. Meanwhile, his rival, Philip II of Spain, maintained elaborate bathing chambers in his palaces, but used them primarily for foot washing and partial cleaning rather than full immersion. Perhaps the most amusing royal bathing story comes from King Louis IX of France, later known as Saint Louis. This deeply religious monarch tried to balance his spiritual beliefs with his royal responsibilities by taking what he called penitential baths. He would bathe in cold water as a form of religious discipline, believing that the discomfort would help purify his soul while the cleaning would maintain his royal dignity. His courtiers reported that he would emerge from these cold baths shivering, but somehow spiritually refreshed. The female royals often had even more complex relationships with bathing. Catherine de' Medici, the powerful French queen, was rumored to bathe in wine and milk mixtures to maintain her youthful appearance. She employed Italian perfumers and bath specialists who created elaborate recipes using exotic ingredients like ground pearls and gold flakes. Her bathing sessions were said to be more like alchemical experiments than simple cleaning rituals. What these royal stories reveal is that medieval monarchs faced the same basic human needs as everyone else, but their solutions were often magnified by wealth, power, and the unique pressures of royal life. They had to balance personal preferences with medical advice, religious teachings, and political considerations. Their bathing habits became statements about their character, their piety, their sophistication, and their connection to different cultural traditions. These royal bathing stories also show us that luxury and cleanliness don't always go hand in hand. Having unlimited resources didn't automatically make medieval monarchs cleaner than their subjects. Instead, it gave them more elaborate ways to avoid, enjoy, or ritualize their encounters with soap and water. Their choices reflected the complex world they inhabited, where every personal decision carried political, religious, and social implications that extended far beyond the privacy of their royal bathing chambers. Imagine being a medieval European knight, raised on stories about the barbaric East, arriving in the Holy Land after months of grueling travel, only to discover that your supposed enemies live in a world of unimaginable cleanliness and luxury. This is exactly what happened to thousands of crusaders during the 11th and 12th centuries, and their encounters with Islamic bathing culture would forever change European attitudes toward hygiene. Picture this scene. A dusty, travel-worn crusader knight enters Damascus for the first time in the year 1199. He's been on the road for over a year. His armor is caked with mud and sweat, and he hasn't had a proper wash since leaving Europe. As he walks through the city's bustling streets, he notices something extraordinary. The air is filled with the scent of jasmine and rosewater. Steam rises from elegant buildings throughout the city, and he can hear the sound of flowing water and quiet conversations echoing from within. What this knight was witnessing was the hammam, the Islamic public bathhouse, an institution so sophisticated and luxurious that it would seem almost magical to European eyes. These weren't the simple wooden tubs and rough linen cloths that Europeans were accustomed to. These were architectural marvels with domed ceilings, intricate tile work, and multiple chambers designed for different stages of the bathing process. The hammam experience began in a warm room where bathers would gradually adjust to the heat while socializing and relaxing. From there, they would move to increasingly hot chambers, each one more steamy than the last. The hottest room featured marble slabs where professional bath attendants would scrub visitors with rough mitts, removing dead skin and impurities with a thoroughness that Europeans had never experienced. The final stage involved a return to cooler rooms where bathers could rinse with perfumed water and receive oil massages that left their skin soft and fragrant. For crusaders accustomed to the European belief that frequent bathing was spiritually dangerous and medically risky, witnessing these daily rituals was profoundly shocking. They saw Muslim men and women emerging from the bathhouses looking refreshed, healthy, and remarkably clean. Even more surprising was the discovery that these bathing rituals were actually religious obligations. Islam taught that cleanliness was literally half of faith, and Muslims were required to perform ritual washing before prayers 5 times daily. The contrast couldn't have been more stark. These European warriors, who had traveled thousands of miles to fight what they believed was a holy war, discovered that their enemies were far cleaner than they were. Many crusaders began to question everything they had been taught about Eastern peoples being uncivilized barbarians. How could people who maintained such extraordinary standards of cleanliness and built such beautiful bathing facilities be considered primitive? Word of these discoveries spread quickly through the crusader camps. Knights would whisper to each other about the incredible luxury they had witnessed. Some began to secretly visit the local bathhouses, initially perhaps out of simple curiosity, but often returning again and again as they discovered the genuine pleasure and health benefits of regular bathing. One of the most detailed accounts comes from a Frankish knight named William of Tyre, who spent decades in the Holy Land. He wrote extensively about his amazement at the Islamic approach to personal hygiene. He described bathhouses that could accommodate hundreds of people simultaneously, with separate sections for men and women, attendants who spoke multiple languages to serve international visitors, and amenities that surpassed anything he had ever seen in European palaces. The Crusaders also discovered that Islamic bathing culture included elements that were completely foreign to European thinking. They found bathhouses that served as social clubs where merchants conducted business, scholars debated philosophy, and poets shared their latest works. These weren't just places for washing, they were cultural centers that played vital roles in community life. Many Crusaders became so enamored with these bathing customs that they began incorporating them into their daily routines while living in the East. They learned to appreciate the ritual aspects of cleansing, the social benefits of communal bathing, and the simple physical pleasure of being truly clean. Some even began to adopt Islamic concepts about the spiritual significance of purification. When these Crusaders eventually returned to Europe, many brought their newfound appreciation for bathing with them. They attempted to recreate the Eastern bathing experience in their own homes, importing perfumed soaps, aromatic oils, and even trying to build primitive versions of hammams in their castles. Some returning knights became advocates for better hygiene practices, sharing stories of the health and social benefits they had observed in the East. However, their enthusiasm for Eastern bathing customs was met with deep suspicion and hostility from church authorities back home. Religious leaders viewed these new hygiene practices as dangerous foreign influences that could corrupt Christian souls. They argued that adopting Muslim customs, even something as seemingly innocent as bathing habits, was a form of spiritual contamination that threatened the very foundations of Christian society. The church's reaction was swift and severe. Priests preached sermons warning against the seductive dangers of Eastern luxury. They reminded their congregations that excessive attention to bodily cleanliness was a sign of vanity and worldliness. Some religious authorities even suggested that Crusaders who had adopted Islamic bathing practices had been spiritually weakened by their exposure to foreign customs. This created a fascinating cultural tension that would persist for centuries. On one hand, returning Crusaders had direct personal experience of the benefits of regular bathing and sophisticated hygiene practices. They had seen with their own eyes that cleanliness and health went hand in hand. On the other hand, they faced enormous pressure from religious and social authorities to reject these foreign influences and return to traditional European customs. The result was a gradual but significant shift in European attitudes toward bathing, though it would take centuries to fully develop. Some wealthy families began to construct private bathing facilities in their homes, inspired by Eastern designs but adapted to European sensibilities. Trade relationships established during the Crusades brought exotic soaps, perfumes, and bathing accessories to European markets for the first time. Perhaps most importantly, the Crusaders' encounter with Islamic bathing culture planted seeds of doubt about European assumptions regarding hygiene and civilization. It became increasingly difficult to maintain that Eastern peoples were barbaric when European warriors had personally witnessed their superior standards of cleanliness, their architectural achievements, and their sophisticated understanding of health and wellness. This cultural exchange through bathing represents one of the most unexpected and lasting legacies of the Crusades. What began as military campaigns intended to impose European Christian values on the East ended up introducing European society to ideas and practices that would eventually transform their own culture. The next time you enjoy a hot shower or visit a modern spa, remember that you're participating in a tradition that traveled from east to west through the complex cultural exchanges of medieval warfare and diplomacy. As we reach the end of our journey through medieval hygiene, one thing becomes crystal clear. The Middle Ages were filled with more contradictions and surprises than any Hollywood movie could ever capture. We've seen a world where luxurious public bathhouses thrived alongside deep-seated fears of water, where kings avoided baths while their subjects created ingenious alternatives to soap, and where religious warriors discovered that their supposed enemies were actually far cleaner than they were. Think about the remarkable irony of it all. In the same century, you could find European nobles proudly boasting about bathing only twice in their entire lives, while just a few hundred miles away, Islamic scholars were writing detailed treatises on the health benefits of daily washing. You could witness the closing of magnificent bathhouses in Paris due to plague fears, while in Constantinople, Similar facilities continue to serve thousands of people daily with remarkable success. These contradictions reveal something profound about human nature and the power of cultural beliefs. Medieval Europeans weren't inherently dirty or ignorant people. They were responding to genuine fears, religious teachings, and medical theories that made perfect sense within their worldview. When the Black Death killed 1/3 of Europe's population, it was entirely rational to question every aspect of daily life that might have contributed to the catastrophe, including bathing practices that had been taken for granted for centuries. What's truly fascinating is how these medieval hygiene practices influenced the course of history in ways that most people never consider. The abandonment of public bathing in Europe may have indeed contributed to the spread of diseases that continued to plague European cities for centuries. Meanwhile, cultures that maintained strong hygiene traditions often showed greater resistance to epidemic diseases and generally better public health outcomes. The Crusaders' discovery of Eastern bathing culture represents one of history's great moments of cultural awakening. These men traveled thousands of miles to fight what they believed was a holy war, only to discover that their enemies possessed knowledge and practices that could dramatically improve their own lives. It's a powerful reminder that some of humanity's greatest advances have come not from conquest or domination, but from the humble willingness to learn from others. Consider how different European history might have been if the Church had embraced, rather than rejected, the hygiene innovations that Crusaders brought back from the East. Would the devastating plagues that swept through European cities have been less severe? Would urban populations have grown faster and stronger? Would the Renaissance have begun earlier if people had been healthier and more comfortable in their daily lives? The medieval period also shows us the incredible creativity of human beings when faced with limitations and challenges. When Europeans couldn't or wouldn't bathe regularly, they didn't simply give up on cleanliness. Instead, they developed wine washing, herbal scrubs, scent bags, and dry cleaning techniques that were surprisingly effective. They created entirely new industries around perfumes, linens, and personal accessories designed to maintain hygiene without water. These innovations remind us that there's rarely just one solution to any human problem. Today, we take our modern hygiene practices for granted, but medieval people show us that there are many different ways to stay clean, smell pleasant, and maintain social acceptability. Their methods might seem strange to us, but they worked within the context of their time and beliefs. The story of medieval hygiene also highlights the complex relationship between individual choice and social pressure. Even kings and queens, with all their power and wealth, were constrained by the medical theories and religious teachings of their era. Queen Elizabeth's monthly baths and King Louis's lifetime avoidance of water weren't just personal preferences. They were carefully considered decisions made within a framework of beliefs about health, spirituality, and social responsibility. Perhaps most importantly, the medieval hygiene story teaches us about the danger of assuming that progress always moves in a straight line. The Europeans who abandoned their bathhouses weren't moving backward from ignorance. They were responding to new information and changing circumstances. The fact that their response may have been misguided doesn't make it any less understandable or human. This brings us to a question that historians continue to debate. Did medieval hygiene practices actually contribute to the spread of disease, or were other factors more important? The answer is probably complex, involving everything from urban planning and waste management to trade routes and climate change. What we can say with certainty is that hygiene practices were just one piece of a much larger puzzle of medieval health and society. As we look back on these medieval hygiene adventures, we can appreciate both the ingenuity and the limitations of our ancestors. They faced challenges we can barely imagine, yet they found ways to maintain dignity, comfort, and social connection, even under the most difficult circumstances. Their story reminds us that human beings are remarkably adaptable, creative, and resilient, even when operating under beliefs and constraints that seem strange to us today. The next time you step into a hot shower or visit a modern spa, remember the long and fascinating journey that brought us these simple pleasures. Remember the medieval bathhouse attendants who perfected the art of hospitality, the Crusaders who discovered new ways of thinking about cleanliness, the kings and queens who navigated the complex politics of personal hygiene, and the countless ordinary people who found creative ways to stay fresh and clean in a world very different from our own. Their stories remind us that hygiene, like so many aspects of human culture, is never just about practical necessity. It's about identity, community, spirituality, and the endless human quest to feel comfortable in our own skin while remaining acceptable to the people around us. The medieval world may seem distant and strange, but in their struggles with cleanliness and social acceptance, these long-ago people were remarkably similar to us. If you enjoyed this video, please like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the Medieval Archives channel for more content about the Middle Ages. See you in the next video.